The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked sidewalks of Riverside Avenue. Ice cream trucks jingled in the distance, and the occasional sound of children's laughter filled the air. But for Mr. and Mrs. Dalton, this afternoon was meant to be quiet. They had spent 52 years together, sharing everything from laughter to heartbreak. And now, in their golden years, a simple walk to the corner store was their little adventure. Harold Dalton, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and gentle eyes, held the hand of his wife, Margaret, who shuffled carefully in her orthopedic shoes. They had brought with them a small cooler with bottled water and a few sandwiches, planning to sit by the fountain in the park after picking up a cold drink. Their joy was in the simplicity of the day, nothing extravagant, just time together. But on this street, tranquility was fragile. A group of young men, leaning against a row of motorcycles parked haphazardly on the curb, were the epitome of trouble in leather jackets. Laughter rolled from them like thunder, loud, unrestrained, and cruel. They had spent the afternoon drinking, smoking, and daring each other to escalate petty acts of mischief. It started innocently enough with loud comments, whistles, and mocking gestures as the elderly couple walked by. "Hey, look at Grandpa and Grandma," one of the boys jeered. "Is this your Sunday stroll, old folks?" Their laughter, high-pitched and mocking, pierced the quiet street. Harold kept his composure, nodding politely but moving along, hoping the youths would lose interest. Margaret's hand tightened around his, unease creeping into her chest. But before they could reach the corner store, a bottle of Coca-Cola, half-empty, sticky, and fizzing, was launched from the crowd. It hit Margaret squarely on the shoulder, the liquid soaking her blouse. "Oh my God, Harold," she cried, brushing at the dark stains as laughter erupted around them. The boys stepped closer now, emboldened by their own cruelty. "Aw, come on, Granny, it's just a little soda. Don't be such a wet rag." One sneered, pushing the bottle closer to Harold. Another spat on the ground, chuckling as if their audacity were a badge of honor. Harold's heart pounded, not with fear exactly, but with a righteous anger he hadn't felt in decades. He glanced at the group, seeing them clearly now, 5 boys, each trying to outdo the other in brazenness. And he realized something with a sharp, sinking clarity. They had no idea who he was or what he could do, but that thought was fleeting. He didn't want to escalate. He wanted a simple resolution. Margaret's hands shook as she tried to shield herself from further attacks. "Please, please just leave us alone," she begged, her voice quivering. But the boys only laughed harder. One of them grabbed a can from his pocket and sprayed soda across Harold's shoes, leaving them slick with sticky liquid. The humiliation of it stung worse than the cold wetness of the drinks. It was in that moment, standing on the sun-baked asphalt with his wife trembling beside him, that Harold's expression hardened. The world outside this street might see him as a quiet, harmless retiree, but what these boys didn't know, and what the world had never seen, was the other life his son had lived. Michael Dalton was a Navy SEAL. Years spent in grueling training, covert operations, and high-stakes missions around the world had shaped him into one of the most disciplined and lethal operators in the U.S. military. And though he rarely flaunted his skills, his parents' safety had always been paramount in his mind. Harold felt a flicker of hope. Michael's phone was never far from reach. The moment Harold pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly, a voice in his head whispered, "They won't know what hit them." The boys, unaware of the storm about to descend upon them, continued their mockery, throwing more soda, laughing louder, their arrogance building like a fire before a storm. They didn't know that the ordinary couple they had chosen as victims were protected by someone who could move through the shadows, strike with precision, and disappear without a trace. Margaret, catching a glimpse of her husband's grim determination, whispered, "Harold, do something." But Harold only shook his head. "No, not yet. Let's see how quickly karma can arrive," he said, a faint, knowing smile brushing his lips. As the laughter of the bullies echoed down Riverside Avenue, a black SUV rolled silently around the corner. Its engine hummed low, barely audible, yet in that quiet, contained power there was a promise. Inside, Michael Dalton's dark eyes scanned the street, pinpointing the source of the disturbance. His jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the wheel. The day, which had begun as a simple walk in the sun, was about to take a turn the boys could never have imagined. And when Michael Dalton stepped from the SUV, his presence alone made the air seem heavier, charged with tension. For the five boys, the next moments would change their lives forever, though they had no inkling of it yet. The black SUV glided to a stop a few feet away from the group of reckless youths. Michael Dalton stepped out, his movements deliberate, controlled, almost surgical. The sun glinted off his dark sunglasses, and his posture radiated the calm confidence of someone who had faced life-and-death situations far worse than a few spoiled teenagers. The air seemed to change around him, the hum of Riverside Avenue fading into silence as if the city itself held its breath. The boys were still laughing, throwing insults and mocking gestures at the elderly couple, entirely unaware of the figure now approaching. One of them, a tall boy with a leather vest and a tattoo spiraling up his forearm, even threw another bottle at Margaret, who instinctively ducked. The bottle hit the asphalt with a wet thud. And then Michael spoke. His voice was low, smooth, yet carried an unmistakable authority. "Hey." The laughter stopped. A pause, awkward and uneasy, fell over the group. They exchanged glances, trying to gauge if this was some random stranger. "What do you want, man?" the tallest one asked, trying to sound tough, but his voice cracked slightly under the weight of unease. Michael took a step closer. "You just assaulted two innocent people. They're old enough to be your grandparents. What the hell is wrong with you?" His tone wasn't shouting. It didn't need to be. The quiet precision of his words carried a weight heavier than any raised fist. The boys shifted nervously. The bravado that had fueled their cruelty wavered. We were just having fun," muttered one, his smile faltering. Michael's eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "Fun? Pouring soda on someone and laughing about it? That's your idea of fun?" His gaze swept over each boy, sharp, calculating. The tallest one swallowed hard, the tattoo on his arm seeming less intimidating in the presence of this calm storm. "You don't know who you're messing with," Michael said quietly, taking another step. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but each boy felt it in their chest like a punch. Harold and Margaret were frozen behind him, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. "Michael," Harold whispered, relief and pride in his voice. He had never seen his son like this, standing in silence but commanding the room as if it were a battlefield he had mastered decades ago. One of the boys, braver or more foolish than the rest, raised his chin. "And what are you gonna do about it?" he sneered, though his voice lacked conviction. Michael tilted his head slightly, just enough to catch the sun glinting off a nearby motorcycle mirror. "Everything," he said simply. Then the lesson began. Michael moved with lightning precision. Without a hint of hesitation, he intercepted the bottle that was already midair, flipping it and tossing it aside so it shattered harmlessly on the asphalt. The movement was so fast that the boys couldn't comprehend it. It was like watching a blur of shadows. The tallest boy lunged, trying to intimidate Michael physically, but Michael sidestepped smoothly, catching the boy's wrist mid-swing and twisting it behind him in a joint lock. A sharp, controlled motion, and the boy crumpled to the ground with a stunned yelp. The other boys froze, panic flooding their faces. They were witnessing someone who wasn't just angry, someone who was precise, lethal in his control. Their laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by fear they had never known. "You all need to leave," Michael said calmly, his grip on the first boy never loosening. "And I mean right now." The other boys hesitated, glancing at the crumpled figure on the ground, their bravado evaporating like mist. Then, one by one, they turned and ran, scrambling toward the safety of their motorcycles, their earlier arrogance replaced by pure terror. Michael released the boy once they were far enough, his movements still fluid, controlled. The boy stumbled to his feet, rubbing his wrist, realizing that escape had been his only option. Harold and Margaret approached, their hands trembling, eyes wide with admiration. "Michael, that was incredible," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "I've never seen anything like it." Michael removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were both steely and tender. He looked at his parents, a faint smile breaking the intensity of his features. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern cutting through his usual stoicism. Harold nodded, swallowing hard. "Thanks to you, we're more than okay. You saved us." Michael shook his head. "No one should have to face that alone. And I want you both to understand something. People like that, they thrive on fear. They think they're untouchable, but you are never alone. Not while I'm around." Margaret's eyes glistened with tears. "I never imagined our son," she choked, trying to speak. "A Navy SEAL here saving us." Michael smiled, though faintly. "You raised me well, and that's why I know, whatever comes our way, we can handle it." The quiet returned to Riverside Avenue, but it felt different now. The air seemed charged, as if everyone on the street had just witnessed a shift in power, a reminder that strength wasn't always visible, and courage didn't always announce itself with noise. As Michael led his parents to the corner store just a few steps away, a thought crossed his mind. This incident was minor, just a street harassment, but it reflected a truth he had lived by. Evil, cruelty, and arrogance never took a holiday, and sometimes the world needed someone to remind them. For the Dalton family, life returned to its ordinary rhythm, but nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The memory of fear transformed into a lesson in courage, protection, and the silent power of someone willing to stand for those who cannot defend themselves. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Riverside Avenue was quiet again, except for the occasional distant laugh of children playing. But for Harold and Margaret Dalton, their hearts beat with newfound reassurance, and the thought of their son, a Navy SEAL, brought a warmth that no summer sun could match. And somewhere in the shadows of the street, the boys who had tormented the elderly couple would carry the memory of that day forever, a lesson in respect, fear, and the invisible shield of a son's love and discipline. The evening settled over Riverside Avenue, painting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Michael Dalton, now back in his black SUV, drove slowly behind his parents, ensuring they reached the safety of their home without incident. The warm glow from street lamps reflected off the polished leather of the car seats, and for a moment, everything felt ordinary again. But Michael's instincts never rested. He knew the boys who had humiliated his parents hadn't forgotten. The tallest of the group, Jason "Spike" Rivers, was already plotting revenge in his cluttered bedroom, surrounded by empty soda cans and the lingering haze of arrogance. His friends hovered around him, pale from fear but still clinging to bravado. "We can't just let it go," one whispered, eyes darting nervously. "That guy, he was insane." Spike slammed his fist on the desk. "We'll get them back," he growled. "We'll make them regret it. He won't be there forever." But Michael Dalton, who had anticipated this possibility, had already taken precautions. Within the next hour, he had discreetly traced the boys' social media, their local hangouts, and even the motorcycles they had ridden. Every move they might make to retaliate would be monitored, anticipated, and neutralized. The planning, precision, and foresight that had made him a Navy SEAL were now tools for protecting the people he loved most. Back at the Dalton home, Harold and Margaret were finally able to breathe without the weight of fear pressing on their shoulders. "I can't believe how calm you were, Michael," Harold said, breaking the silence as they settled in the cozy living room. "You could have hurt them badly, but you didn't." Michael shrugged, pouring himself a cup of tea. "They were kids making stupid choices. My job was to make sure they learned their lesson without anyone getting hurt. Fear teaches better than pain." Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. "I always worried about you when you joined the Navy, but now I see why you had to. Not for the medals or missions, but so you could be ready for moments like this." The night deepened, and while the Daltons drifted into sleep, Michael remained awake, scanning reports, checking logs, and making sure that no ripple from today's events would spiral into danger. Hours later, a sound outside caught his attention, the low rumble of motorcycles returning to Riverside Avenue. It was them, Spike and his remaining friends, emboldened by anger and youthful recklessness. They had gathered weapons, chains, bats, and even a few makeshift tools, and were sneaking toward the Dalton home, determined to confront Michael and reclaim some shred of dignity. Michael stepped outside, calm as ever, his presence immediately noticed by the intruders. "I told you to leave," he said, his tone devoid of anger but rich with authority. The boys froze. Spike swung a chain, attempting to intimidate him, but Michael's reflexes were too fast. In a series of movements so fluid and precise it looked like choreography, Michael disarmed Spike, wrapping the chain around his wrist and pinning him to the ground. The other boys tried to rush him, but each one was met with a controlled, non-lethal maneuver that incapacitated them in seconds. By the time the local police arrived, called discreetly by Michael to ensure no further trouble, the boys were immobilized, sitting quietly on the curb, bruised egos and sore wrists the only injuries. Officers took statements, and the Daltons gave testimony, but Michael knew the lesson had been learned far beyond what any official report could convey. Days passed, and Riverside Avenue slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The boys, now facing community service and mandatory counseling, began to understand the consequences of cruelty. They avoided the Daltons entirely, carrying with them the memory of the Navy SEAL who could move like a shadow and strike with precision, not out of malice, but out of love and duty. Harold and Margaret, once cautious and timid, found a renewed confidence in their lives. Their daily walks continued, but now with a sense of safety that radiated from Michael's quiet presence. Their neighbors whispered about the guardian son, though no one fully knew the extent of his abilities. The Daltons didn't mind. They had seen enough to know that some strengths were meant to be private, yet immensely powerful. One evening the family gathered on the porch, the sunset casting long golden beams over their garden. Michael sat beside his parents, watching the street where the incident had occurred. "You two were brave today," he said softly. "Bravery isn't always about strength, it's about standing together, even when the world is cruel." Margaret rested her head on his shoulder. "And you are always our shield." Michael smiled faintly, the weight of countless missions and battles momentarily lifted. "I'll always be here," he whispered, "for both of you." Riverside Avenue had witnessed chaos, fear, and the raw edge of youthful arrogance. But it had also witnessed courage, precision, and the invisible shield of a son's love. The Daltons were safe, their hearts lighter, and the boys who had tormented them would carry the memory of this day forever. An enduring lesson that cruelty never goes unchallenged, and that sometimes justice arrives quietly, efficiently, and without warning. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the final glow over the street, the Dalton family sat together, a portrait of resilience, love, and unspoken power. A Navy SEAL may have been the instrument, but the real strength was in the bonds of family, a force far greater than any adversary and one that would never be broken.